In this episode of SENSimilla, we'll be talking to a veteran entrepreneur who spent most of his career on the tech side of things, running a web company, building out another company that helped consumers find financial products. Real nerd stuff, people. A family man, an entrepreneur. Our guest today wasn't particularly interested in cannabis until stress finally got the best of him, and he decided to give it a go. That go led him down a deep, deep cannabis rabbit hole that we've all been down, eventually motivating our guest to start his own cannabis brand. Jason Reposa, founder of Good Feels. Welcome to SENSimilla.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bravo!
Yay! I made it. I'm here.
Yeah, dude. I've been interested in your story since the day I met you a couple years ago at some conference.
Many cans ago. Yeah.
Sure. And, you know, you have a look. You definitely have a look. And when I first met you, you were a fresh-faced, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, new cannabis entrepreneur. Now you're 3 years deep. You're a veteran in the cannabis space, practically. You're a guru now. You started a few businesses in your journey. Talk to me about some of the less obvious differences in starting a cannabis business versus any other. Like we always hear about, banking, like no shit. But talk to me about some of the things.
Oh, that's a great one.
Coming. Thanks,
yeah, that's
Jason.
a great one. Yeah, well, in this particular business, I solo founded it. In all my previous companies, I always had co-founders. That's the immediate one that comes to my head right now. And if you're a co-founder in a business, you have another expert who is equally as invested in this company as you, that you can just trust that everything will get done. You're just like, because that's the way it was with my other two business partners in my last two companies. Because we shared ownership over both the companies.
Yeah.
It was just like, hey, Alex, like go take care of sales and media communications, all that stuff. Hey, Tadas, go do creative director, like make sure all the design gets tight and stuff like that. And you could just trust that they were going to do those things. And I'd be trusted to do all the technology, right? Mm-hmm. But in this, as a solo founder, I don't have that level of like trusted, invested person in the company. Mm-hmm. Of course, two things we've done here to improve that, I would say, is we hired really talented people at the higher level. And then we also give employees as bonuses as we go, a little bit of equity along with it. So we actually give equity to our employees. And so like, it's helpful, but it's not the same thing as having a co-founder. A co-founder is like your brother in arms. It's like, we're going to war together. Whereas like an employee is just like, it's like, it's like 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and it's kind of getting late. I got to do other, I got to get to my family and all this stuff.
Right.
Whereas, I can't even count the amount of hours I work. I just don't stop, Yeah.
I was just going to get lunch and I ran into not a client, but a local dispensary owner. I was going this way. He was going that way. And he goes, Will, it must be nice to have a day off. And I'm like, bro, I've worked 7 days a week since 2016. Like, I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know.
He has no idea. I'm like, a day off.
Oh, you're ancillary. So you get to vacation all the time.
Yeah. You've hired all the right people now. And now you can like wander around downtown Burlington or whatever it is you're doing. I'm like, nah, dude, this is the 2 minutes I had to go like shove a sandwich in my mouth, like as fast as I can. Let me real quick. So like founders, like you refer to them as brothers in arms. And the thing about brothers in arms is that they're still your brother. And sometimes you want to murder your brother, which I certainly do. I have a few. I didn't necessarily, there were people helping me to create CannaPlanners, but I was also a solo founder, in this company. So I've heard in doing this podcast and talking to all the founders and CEOs that I have, you hear both sides of the co-founder journey, which is I couldn't have done it without them, or like we hated each other and we almost murdered each other. So given as though it doesn't sound like you had that, kind of.
Oh, we had our moments.
Sure. Of course.
We 100% had our moments.
But I guess I'm just curious if like, does that make you sad that you weren't able to share an experience in starting Good Feels? Like, is it a regret in any way? Like not like doing it on your own?
Yeah, in a sense, just because, but like this started as an MVP. You're a tech guy. You know what that means, right? So it's just like, this was
Can you define MVP for our entrepreneurial noobs?
Sure. And a minimum viable product.
Right.
Basically, you're testing the inkling of the theory that
Yep.
this is a thing, just to try
Yeah.
to see if there's product market fit. And once you
Yeah.
achieve that, you're like, okay, now let's go big and let's make it a thing. But up until that point, it's an experiment, right? So
Yep.
coming from the tech world, I approached it through that lens. I literally said to myself, I'm going to just put out like this small little trial. And if it works, then I'll go big and I'll do all these other things.
Mm-hmm.
Little did I know that it took 18 months just to open our doors. Right. So
Yeah.
it's like I didn't realize, and of course, burning payroll for like the last 6 months of it because I thought the CCC was going to give our license in November, October. And instead they gave it to us in like we eventually got our commence operations in March. So
Wow.
literally blew through like 5-6 months worth of payroll because I had everybody staffed up at that point. So yeah, there's obviously a lot of mistakes along the way. But I do regret it a little bit because right now, like I'm training my higher level people, my managers, director level people to like,
Yep.
they don't always have to come to me for answers.
Yeah.
Like your big smile on your face. Yeah, of course,
Well,
because it's like,
so this is called something. It has a name. It has a non-creative name, and I've read about this in a few Harvard Business Review studies on management, and it's called the monkey on the back. Right. So the monkey on the back is when you as the founder are dealing with your day to day, but you have a set of managers who then come in and basically lay their baggage on you. Right. Like, here's a managerial problem that maybe I can solve and maybe I can't solve. And therein lies the monkey that they then put on your back, because now you have to either coach them through how to solve it or remind them that it's their job to solve that problem, right?
I try to do more coaching than anything
Sure, of course.
nowadays. In the beginning, I was solving problems just because with speed to market being so important to us, it was really me going in and just answering the question for them, being like, we're just doing this because of XYZ. Like, I'll explain
Sure.
to you deeper if you really want me to reason it out for you. But like, for the most part, we're just doing that. Whereas now I'm like coaching people because it's even stuff like, if there's a vendor if we're doing new packaging for like a new product,
Yep.
and I'm just like, hey, how's it going with the packaging? And they're like, oh yeah, I sent them an email like a couple of days ago and all this other stuff. I'm like, well, it's like we're going to be launching this we want to launch this quicker. Just can you pick up the phone and call them? You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
just one less day that goes by, we could make that decision. Just cuts down so much work. Whereas, and we're all busy here, of course. So like, I can only push that so far because they're also working on a bunch of other stuff.
Yep.
So, but I'm just trying to shorten up that length, right? Just to say like, hey, instead of taking 6 months to launch a product, let's do it in 3.
Sure.
Right. So yes, I do miss that camaraderie because even though we did fight, we all had a vested interest in making it all succeed. And so I was typically the mediator at the company, and I was always in between to kind of alpha, like, we're doing it this way. We'll all listen to each other, but some people like, I think we should do this. I think we should do this. And I'd be the guy saying like, you guys are saying the identical thing.
Yeah.
You're just saying it different, right? So you're saying this, which is get you this result, and you're saying this, which gets you the same result. So the tactics, although varied, will get you the same result. And so on the tactical basis, we can do this, which kind of solves that also for you, right? And so therefore we're able to like push that forward, where right now it's just like in my head, I have advisors too, which, have been a fantastic asset to me.
Sure.
But I'll have to like run through all the different use cases in my head as quick as possible. Like, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if? And I'll just run through it really quickly and make the decision sometimes. But I don't have that open kind of conversation on that level of like the business ownership level, which is what I'm missing a little bit.
It's you. Like, maybe you can go to your staff to get maybe input and feedback on how a decision should be made or how they'd like a decision to be made, as opposed to like, here's how we all think. Here's what we think the decision is. Right. Ultimately, it still falls on your lap.
Yeah, it does.
Like I said in the intro, you've started a few companies before Good Feels. So like, I kind of want to get to there. And in case you don't know, kind of the trajectory of what I like to talk about is for sure, like, it's journey driven. Like, I love the idea of the journey, but because the theme of these podcasts start to talk about kind of the unwritten unknowns, emotional human capacity of being an entrepreneur. Those are the things that I love. Like, I love talking about failure. I love talking about success, but I love talking about fear. And I love talking about, the things that would keep non-entrepreneurs or people who don't find themselves in sadomasochistic situations like us, where we're just, constantly torturing ourselves, that they don't get to experience because that fear, because whatever. So before we get to good feels, I'm curious if you can just take me through quickly, or not quickly, slowly, take your time, do whatever you want, Jason, you're your own man, but tell me about these companies. God damn it.
Already. So, no, I know all about your journey and all this other stuff. So like, I love this podcast. So basically the way this looks through like the way, I approached my life was I always just started things. I just couldn't to help myself. Right. So like, I was just that kid that was selling bubble gum on the bus, kicking up lemonade stands. I even started a baseball card sale company, like a store, because I had a ton of baseball cards. And I knew their value, and I tracked everything. And I was like, all right, I can mark it up this amount. And so I was just that kid. And when I went through my education process and became a computer scientist and really started digging deeper and deeper into computer science, I realized that I could never be the best computer programmer ever, because I was at an engineering school where I was maybe in the top 10%, but there was people way better than me, because those top 1% people were on the stratosphere. That's how much better they were. Right. And so like going through that process and be like, well, I guess business is kind of like my thing. Like, it doesn't have to be computer based, but I just happen to have all those skills.
Was that real quick? Do you remember that moment? Was it sobering for you to be like, oh, there's people that are smarter than I am?
Yeah, that was totally, I was just like, because I came from the community college system to go into this really high end engineering school called WPI, Worcester Polytech.
Sure.
And I was always the smartest kid in all of the classes. But again, it was community college. So I didn't know, and it's, just a step one level back from that. I'll tell you how naive I was back then. I went and I walked into a community college called Middlesex Community College in Lowell, Massachusetts. This particular, there's two, one in Lowell and one in Bedford, Massachusetts, or New Bedford, or whatever it is. I can't remember anymore. Walked into Lowell. I walked into the campus and I said, I'd like to apply to go to college here. They handed me the application and I was like, all right, great. So I filled it all out. I handed it back to them. And I said to them, when do I know if I got in?
they're like just run your credit card.
Yeah. I thought they had to like do this whole approval process.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of professors going to look at this and be like, yeah, I don't know about this guy. He barely graduated high school.
Sure.
So
you thought you were applying to Harvard.
Yeah, exactly. So I literally thought I was. And so when I finally got to community college, I'm like, oh, computers just clicked in my head. That's just the way my brain worked. And so it clicked so easily. I was blowing through the classes to the point where I was tutoring the other kids in the class. Right. And so by the time I got to the engineering school, I was like, I'm the best of the best. Like, I'm going to crush it. When I get there, within the first month, my roommate that I had bunked up with, he cracked the WPI computer system. He literally broke into it.
He's giving everybody 4 O's.
Yeah. He literally he was like, he couldn't really, he wasn't going to do anything. He just wanted to know if he could.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's like another level, right?
Yeah.
He eventually went to high frequency trading and is crazy rich right now.
I bet.
So that's a different story. But like, he used all those skills to like just generate wealth for other people, specifically like these, private equity company, not private equity, but like these fractional tradings, all this other stuff. Anyways, so by the time I started my first company, I was already CTO of an ad agency. Right. I already kind of climbed up the ladder from junior programmer all the way to CTO. Right. So I did the corporate route for a little bit, and not even corporate, just startups. I just basically worked for startups. Yep. And I was working in an ad agency and eventually said to myself, I don't really want to build things for other people anymore. I want to build stuff for myself. Right. Because that's all we were doing. We were building all kinds of crazy campaigns for champion hoodies. We did a crazy campaign for them, Keds. I can't even remember all. I literally can't remember all of them. It was just a blur because we were all so drunk half the time. So, and sleeping under our desk. It was kind of. It was
like the real deal, sort of Mad Men shit. You were working.
It was nonstop,
big hours. Yeah,
huge. and we were running some crazy campaigns for people. I was in the group of the they had launched this before I'd started, but this was the team that launched the Two-Headed Dog, the MTV2 channel for the Viacom.
Yep.
So like this was like the heavy hitters in the ad agency world. They were up and coming and like doing viral marketing. Like when it was truly like viral marketing, like man on the street stuff. Like they used to, it was a crazy, crazy time in the 2000s in New York City. And so, but I didn't want to build things for other people anymore. And the creative director at the time, which became my future.
Why though?
Just because I had my own itch to scratch. Like, I could keep on building these things, but after a certain point, you're like, yeah, this is going to be a cool project. And then you build it. And then you're like, I don't care about that anymore.
Sure.
Right. You just pass it off. You're like, someone else managed this. I'm bored with that right now. Right. So I ended up meeting my future co-founder at that same company. And he was in the same mind. He was just like, here, I've got this idea. If you want to do it with me, we'll do it like kind of off, outside of this company for a little bit. And if it takes off, maybe we'll just do something with it. And that's what ended up happening. It took off, right? We got our first whale of a client that was paying us $250,000 a year or something like that. And we were like, well, that'll do it. Like that maybe we can support ourselves at least. And then we just took off from there. So yeah, but that's how I first got into like a real like startup with a co-founder. That was kind of like the real entrance point. Because previous to that, I was always a solo founder, and I built, I was door to door selling websites when I was 16. That's the type of person I was. But like that wasn't a real company.
What ended up happening to that first company?
We ended up selling it in 2019.
Cool. I want to talk about the exit strategy, but I kind of want to talk about both exit strategies maybe at once. So let's talk about, so you sell that company, maybe pat yourself on the shoulder. And how long did you give yourself before you were like, I'm bored?
Well, that's what happens because I was the decision maker. I was the CEO, right? And I wasn't the CEO for the entire time, but I was the CEO for the last like 3 or 4 years, right? Or since 2016, so like 3 years. And so since I was the CEO, I was, hey, we're doing all these things and blah, blah, blah. Here's our future initiatives. And I was putting a whole roadmap together. We had all this stuff that we're planning on building. And, and we were generating 8 figures in revenue at that point, right? So I was like in charge, right? And had a substantial amount of responsibility at this point.
Yeah.
So
who made that decision?
Accidentally myself. But so when we got acquired, which was extremely stressful for me, which is part of the reason why I went into cannabis, because it was such a stressful moment for me. I sat around for a little bit and I got bored doing I proposed a few different ideas. I was like, hey, what if we do this? And what if we do that? And like I was talking about like morning brew newsletter stuff. Like back in the day when they were just coming up, I was just like, we should be either advertising on these people or we should be putting out a newsletter like this, but for finance or personal finance. And they just were like, we're good. We're good. They just literally said no to everything. And so at that point I was like, well, what am I doing here? Right. And I didn't have any direct reports at that point either, right? So because all my team, like the SEO people went to the SEO team, the tech people went to the tech team, my marketing people went to the marketing team. So I was just like an idea generator, right? Yep. And so, which I'm fine with because I like generating ideas, but they were so not receptive to anything I had to say. Eventually I just was like, what am I doing here? And so
you kind of grew yourself out of being a necessity in your own company.
Yeah, because they wanted our book, they wanted our client list, they wanted all of our exposure on SEO because we had some really great keywords we ranked for. So they bought what we already had, and they weren't interested in doing something new, right? So
when you were acquired, how long were you around for? Usually, when you get acquired, there's some sort of deal for
9 months, maybe.
Some of the C-suite to stick around for a little while.
Yeah, 9 months, I would say. It's somewhere around that. I don't think I made it a full year. I definitely didn't make it a full year, but I don't remember how close to that year mark I got. But what ended up happening was they just were kind of, since I was in my own island by myself, not really producing anything. They were kind of just like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, exactly. Like, I'm with you. But I also was getting a paycheck. So it's kind of just like, you fired me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so they ended up letting me go, which, historically, this is why I'm an entrepreneur. Historically, I'm a terrible employee.
I say this all the time, Jason. I say this all the time. I'm the worst employee.
I always have to scratch my own itch. And that's kind of why I did my own thing. Even though I was working for other people, I was freelancing on a ton of stuff. I was creating new startups while I was a CTO for that company back at that agency in Soho. Like I was always creating things on the side. Nothing really took off. I remember one of the things I created was the first website chat program, right? Using Flash of all things, where you could actually chat with somebody. And I still have like screenshots of that moment where I actually got it to work. And my wife was in Massachusetts and I was in New York. She was visiting family and I was still in New York. And I was chatting with her with visual images going back and forth. And I'm like, this is amazing, right?
Yeah.
Didn't do anything with it, but I was just like, I just want to see if I could do it.
Yeah. Challenging yourself whenever you can, because you're maybe not being as challenged as much as you used to be.
Just scratching my own itch. That's literally what I do.
9 months passes. The next company happens? This is the financial.
No, that was the financial one. So we went from working at an ad agency as CTO and creative director, and my third partner eventually joined us as well. He was working in the media side, buying media for like M&Ms and all these like really multi-million-dollar contracts. So we're all kind of like at the top of our game, right? Left that ad agency that we were working for to create the finance product, the personal finance product, to be clear, right? And some fintech is involved, and there's a bunch of other stuff we built, like scrapers and data platforms and yada, yada, yada. But like when we left that company, we wanted to not ever work at an ad agency ever again, because we always wanted to work on our own products. So after so these actually happened in parallel, I guess is what I'm saying. So after about a year of working on this, basically like a publishing, like a website, like media company, we built the media company to a point where we're like, it's working, but we're also kind of bored here too. Cause I guess we just have that type of mindset. All of us, we were just like, well, you can't really, how do you make banking sexy? It's like, you know what I mean? It's banking. Like, how do you choose a bank? You just go across the street because there's a bank right across the street. That's how you choose a bank.
If you're in New York, you go to Chase.
You go to Chase, 100%. I still have my Chase account. So basically, after about a year or so, we had former clients of that other company come to us and say, hey, we know you guys were the actual people who were building all this stuff. Could you build us something? And we were like, no. Because the owners of the last company were really great at sales and salespeople and stuff like that. And one of them was a creative person who was also really talented, but they're really salespeople. They weren't really the people behind the creation of it, right? And so when we created these things, all those clients eventually ended up talking to us at some point. So they said, hey, can you work for us? Can you do some work for us? And we were like, no. We're not doing ad agency stuff anymore. We're not an agency. We're not about to build all these other things. Another couple months goes by, more people start reaching out to us, and we're like, they're trying to throw money at us. And I'm like, listen, I said some crazy number, and they agreed. And I was just like, crap, now I have to do this work. Yeah. So we built a team, an agency again, like a year and a half later, or whatever it was. And my timelines are all over the place because it's also like 15 years ago at this point, practically. It was like 2008, 2009. And we built an agency, right? And so that agency, we were one of the first companies. Now we're talking like 2011, right? iPhone just came out. App Store just comes out.
Everybody wants an app.
We are like an app company. We build apps for everybody. When somebody would come to me, I said this to somebody the other day, which I probably shouldn't have said. I wouldn't get out of bed for less than like a $35,000 contract. I was like,
I actually love when people say that. I won't get out of bed for filling your number. It's awesome. You know your worth, Jason. That's what it is.
Well, because we were signing contracts in, 6-figure contracts and, upwards of $1 million to do this work. And so I'm like, if somebody comes to us and they want to do like a small little website, some people were offering us equity for things. Some people were offering us like all these perks. We were just like, no, forget it. Anyways, we create a bunch of apps, some to this day that are still live and launched, right? And have become unicorns in their own right. Yeah. And so we're building all these apps and we're running this media company on the side and we're just doing it in tandem. And so we eventually decided to like formally split the companies into two different entities. Alex, my co-founder from the media side, took on the ad agency side. because that's just sales, like getting more clients in. And I took over my bag tracker side, MBT Media company. And that company, as a CEO, starting in late 2016, early 2017, just kind of like grew that with a lot of help, of course, because media isn't my strong point. At least back then it wasn't. And eventually I said, I don't have any fresh ideas to add to this. Like we should consider selling it at this point.
What motivated you with those early companies, and what do you think motivates you now? And let me, before you answer, for me, like when I was starting this company, my motivation was very simple. It was I'm a bad employee, and no one, like, I need to be responsible for myself, right? In some way. And the only way I can do that is if I take care of myself, if I build something around me. So basically the motivation is like, how can I world build? Right? That was one of the early motivations for this, is how can I take care of myself? And then eventually it's how can I take care of all these people that are now staffed at this company? But like, what were your motivations with those early companies? And like, what do you think is different about what helped you start those companies versus Goodfeels? Yeah.
Yeah. I just love the freedom of being an entrepreneur. Like I set everything on my own schedule, and it's as hard as I want to work is as fast as it'll go. So that's really what drives me, because what kept me going for so long in those other companies was because I had kids now. That's because the paycheck was good. The companies were printing money, and we have health insurance, and we're paying ourselves, distributions, and all. I'm just like, we're living large now, right? Because it was just another time. It was like we started just after the financial crisis in like 2009. And we're creating a personal finance website, which was super interesting because people, finance was a big no-no back then. But having children, which is what kept me on that paycheck for so long before I said, this is enough. Like we have enough. We're set basically for life at this point. Now let's just sell it and give those rewards back to ourselves. But quick side tangent though, and the reason why that's topical is when I got fired. Long story, I'm not going to get into it. When we told that agency in Soho that we were leaving, the two most important people in the company basically were like, we're going to go do our own thing, but we wouldn't tell them what it was. They thought we were starting another agency. And so they immediately marched us out the door. They were like, get out of here. You're done. Starting today, you're gone. Right. That same day, I went home to my 6th floor walk-up tenement building in the Lower East Side, or East Village, I should say. And my wife's there, and she goes, I got news for you. And I got news for you. And I go, I just got fired, or I quit, however you want to say it. Yeah. I just got fired. I'm starting a new thing. I'm starting a new company. We're starting with Tadas, and Alex has said he was going to join us. And, the thing I was working on the side, we think it's starting to take off. So let's just do it. She goes, well, I've got news for you.
I bet I know what it was.
I'm pregnant.
And you're like,
so
fuck.
And I was like, I just gave up all the security in the world because they had a great plan too. And they were paying me a lot of money. So, and I was just like, oh crap, it's just about to get real.
Well, there's these things like, fear can be brought on by anything, but for sure, like, the responsibility of a living, breathing human that can't take care of themselves, that maybe you have a part in creating, like that creates a lot of anxiety around any humans. It's enough to keep a person in a job they hate forever because they want to, there's the security of those things. There's the fear of not having those things. And I've talked about it a little bit before. I've talked about it a lot on this podcast, but I also got fired by my agency employer when I brought this idea to them. So you and I can hold each other after, and we're going to be okay though, buddy. We're going to be okay.
We'll be okay.
Yeah, we did it. We did all right. We touched on it very briefly, but few are lucky enough to have a sensible exit strategy. Can you talk about yours at all?
Yeah, I can talk about one of them. The other one is I still probably can't talk about to this point. Well, no, on the exits, because I had two exits and they were kind of near each other. So the one we did in 2019 was for the media company. And so that particular exit was extremely stressful. We were selling it to a publicly traded company. The publicly traded company was really scrutinizing the deal pretty closely. They have obviously SEC regulate, they have their SEC, their own regulatory body that's looking after everything. So on the SEC side, they have extra scrutiny on things, accounting, finance, everything. We worked with a really great team to help prepare a lot of those documents. But the burden was kind of on me, right? I would just report back to my founders, but like it was on me. And so it was an extremely stressful time in my life. And I've covered this in other podcasts, so I won't go into it too hard, but that's kind of like how that was my beginning of the journey into cannabis, was the fact that I was going through that sale process and I locked my job. I literally couldn't open my mouth because I was under so much stress.
So this thing that would like potentially like provide you with some, maybe like the slightest financial, freedom, or, usually this is a thing to celebrate for entrepreneurs. This is the goal. It's an exit strategy, implying that you've thought about this before it happened, right? But meanwhile, it was like kind of killing you.
Yeah, it was, because we were doing roadshows, right? There was conventions. I'd be going out there by myself.
Right. You still have to run the company.
To all those people. But we were doing the roadshows at these conferences because that's kind of where some of the buyers were. And so I remember this one specific conference at FinCon, it must have been 2018 or something like that. And it was in like Orlando. Actually, I was there with two other people, but still, I was doing a lot of these meetings with all these different companies that we were trying to roadshow it to make sure if they'd be interested in purchasing it. So as we were going through that process, some people were in, some people were out. They all had their own personalities. They all had their reasons for buying and for not buying it. And as we're going in, like solidifying some of these deals, a lot of numbers get thrown around. Some people walked away, and then all of a sudden it's just a stressful process, because you're just like, you're evaluating
your baby,
my entire life is worth at that point. Like that's where all my worth was, in that company. And so they're just like, but how many
years were we talking here before?
Like 10 years I had that company.
Right.
Almost. So 10 years when we sold it.
Yeah. At that point, a third of your entire life had been dedicated to like building this thing. That's like a pretty sizable amount of time.
Yeah. And we were doing over 8 figures in revenue. And so for us, we were just like, we're worth this. And some companies were like, all right, we could see that. And some other companies were like, no, you're not. You're worth this, and we'll pay this price. And it just gets super stressful, because it's like you're exposing your entire soul to these people and some of the insider information about like how we operate to kind of convince them, but we've signed that LOI with that company we ended up going with. It was just like the beginning in reality, because even after the roadshow, now you've got to perform for these people to make sure this deal gets done. And as a first timer going through that was extremely stressful, because I didn't know, and I had some guidance on the side, but like, I was running it. I was running the process myself. You know what I mean?
Is there anything you can, I don't want to get too into the weeds of specifics of like an exit strategy, but like, what was one of the, like, what caused you stress? Like, what was one of the biggest lessons you think you learned?
Biggest, I mean,
let me reframe the question. If you're lucky enough to experience this again, and someone says, Jason, I'd like to write you a check for Good Feels, like, what's the 2020 hindsight that you're going to go into that meeting with?
I'm going to know my numbers. I'm going to know what everything is worth, because we had ideas of what it was worth, which was not based in reality. And Why? it was a check. Well, because we were like, well, the publicly traded stock is at 2.5 revenue, so we should get 2.5 revenue, right? If you're just bringing us on and adding you on as a complementary business on top of what you're already doing, you should be paying 2.5, because that's the PE ratio on a publicly traded stock. So we were looking at it from that perspective, right? And they were just like, but no, in the private world, this is how we're doing it, and it's based on EBITDA. And based on EBITDA, you're worth X. And I'm like, which basically means profit for the people who don't understand EBITDA. Yep. But so we just had to have that come to Jesus moment where we're just like, we're not going to get the price we want. We're just not. So this you just part have of to the problem about it, right?
Because there's like, there's actually 100 different ways to evaluate a company. Mm-hmm. And, you don't always have the luxury of knowing exactly what the person you're speaking with is expecting.
Mhm.
You know, like you could be using the 2.5% or 2x or whatever model. You could be using the 10x sales model. You could be using the, the 40/40. Like there's fucking so many
like
ways
SaaS
to do
companies
this.
have their own. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So in hindsight, I would know my numbers better. I would be way more prepared, and I would actually really do better at like training myself up on sales, because you're selling, right? So it's just like you have to. And back then, I was a tech guy. I wasn't a salesperson, and so I'm having these conversations. I'm a bundle of nerves, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just having this phone conversation, and like I'm trying to impress them to be like, hey, you're getting all this benefit. You have to pay up. And they were kind of like biting it a little bit, but I think I could have sold it harder. I think I could have put more heat on the deal, because we had a bunch of other people who were surrounding us. And all we had to do is go back to them and say, hey, they're bidding X, right? And they're gonna take us, and they're gonna get a really good deal on it. If you come up with more, I could have made a whole auction system almost around it, just being like, hey, where are you at right now? And I could have led it that way. Whereas I had a separate company lead it, and they were great, and I really liked those guys, and they helped me tremendously. But I think I could have added so much more value by being there, knowing all my numbers, know our worth, know exactly what people are paying for things, and just driving the process myself versus being more of like a receiver of information and being passive about it. I could have been the one who's brought all that heat, and heat is what gets deals done, right? You need to put heat on deals
for sure.
Yeah. There's always FOMO. FOMO has been, before FOMO was called FOMO, there's been FOMO.
Yeah, 100%. Totally. You want to give it, you can product place. Go ahead. Show us, what are you drinking, buddy?
Good feels.
Perfect.
I'm actually drinking the uninfused version because it's the middle of my work.
It's too early in the day. It's you got to get back to work. So, okay. So here we are. You're trying to close this exit strategy deal. You're stressed out. Let's put a pin in it. So take me back to young Jason. We've talked to, something that comes up often, especially when I'm talking to similarly aged entrepreneurs. We've been through the DARE program. We've been brainwashed growing up. It impacted certain people one way and certain people the other. So let me articulate. I interviewed Angela Brown from Coast Cannabis the other day, and she was a proud graduate. She says her mother has like some graduation picture from DARE. And then there's me, who was figuring out, how do I break into this suitcase and get all this shit out, right? Where was Lil Reposa on the spectrum of things during all of this? Like, did you grow up consuming cannabis at all? Like,
yeah, so I'm closer to your side of things, but not that far, because I'm not a traditional cannabis consumer. Well, no.
What does that mean?
So a traditional cannabis user, in the sense that like it wasn't something that I grew up with consuming all the time with my friends.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I was around it. I definitely was, because my friends were into it. But, I had that typical like teenage moment where I tried it and I was just like, I don't feel anything. And I never tried it again, basically until like college, right? I maybe tried it a few times in between, but I just didn't understand it. I didn't get it, and it didn't affect me in any way. So I just didn't understand. And then, but I was, like I alluded to earlier, I barely graduated high school, right? So like I didn't really have the greatest academic side of me. So I wasn't that high achieving person. I was more of the athlete, you might say. And so I did football, track, mostly football and track was my specialty. And so growing up, it was really more about like sports for me than anything, and computers, because sports and computers are my two like kind of big things. But computers actually eventually took over everything as I grew up. And, eventually you also learn that you're not the fastest kid on the team, right? So just like I learned eventually that I wasn't the smartest kid at college. I was not the fastest kid in the team either. So that kind of deflates you a little bit. And you're like, I'm just going to jog this one. I don't really have to work that hard. So, but I was definitely in trouble often, I would say, which is, I'm hoping to guide my kids a little bit better in that side. But yeah, I have definitely seen the inside of a jail cell before, unfortunately.
Same. It's okay, buddy. No one judges you for that. It was probably a great story, but we'll talk about that on the next episode. Common SENSimilla After Dark. So you were, not as much of a goody two shoes as Angela from Coast Cannabis. I love you. You're great. And not nearly as much of a delinquent as maybe I was. I love you too. You're great. Also, Will, don't. So you're now, okay, flashback forward to you're trying to sign these deals. You're pulling your hair out. You're not sleeping. You're stressed, dude. Why didn't you start drinking? Why didn't you pick up a pack of smokes? Why didn't you start working out harder? Why didn't you do maybe you did all those things, but why did you think that cannabis was going to be the best solution for you at that time?
I had slowly kind of cut out drinking at that time. So I was already tapering off. Like I would have a drink. Even just after one drink, my body would be like, this is awful. Like, what are you doing to yourself?
I remember,
you know what I mean?
I remember first feeling that way and being like, oh, I guess I don't drink anymore.
Yeah, I kind of just, and I announced it on LinkedIn. I literally said, I don't have a problem, but my body just doesn't like it. It just doesn't like, I don't feel like when I was in my early 30s, I was going out every night, having dinner and drinks. And like I said, at that ad agency in Soho, we drank every day. It wasn't just 5. Eventually 5 became 4, became 3, became 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And we're like, hey, remember that vodka company that just gave us a bunch of fucking vodka? Like, let's go crack those open,
Yeah.
So in New York City, I may have been considered having a problem. But when I moved back to Massachusetts, and I was because I had moved to Massachusetts while I was selling the company, which is a whole nother ordeal. But in the process of selling the company, I'd already tapered off a little bit. And exercise was part of my routine, but it wasn't as much as a stress relief because I wasn't going as much. And I've never been a smoker. You know what I mean? Like I bought one pack once because I was like trying to be cool. And then I tried one and I'm like, I don't like this at all. And so I just never did it.
I guess what I'm asking is like, how did you, I wasn't actually asking why you didn't start drinking.
I know, but I felt like answering. I had to answer those things because to be clear, I didn't do much.
I don't want you to start smoking.
What I did though, was I started researching inflammation.
Yeah.
So that's the trigger word here, because by this point,
that leads to CBD.
I was scrambling because my jaw had locked up, and I was like, I'm talking through the phone, like Kanye West talking through the wire. Like I literally was just like trying to and I was on a liquid diet for like a month, right? I could only have smoothies, and so eventually it was just like, all right, what's good for inflammation? CBD comes up. So I start researching a ton about CBD, and my brain goes super deep, right? I just go super deep into a subject. So eventually, like at the end of that same month, I had probably like 5 or 6 different CBD tinctures that I was testing out. And one of them, High Energetics, which was the first water-based tincture I'd ever heard of. I was like, that was different than the other ones. The CBD ones, and the oil, I was like, those are okay. I sometimes feel something from some of them, but the water-based one made me feel great. So there's something there. So I just kind of like put that in the back of my head.
Yeah.
By the end of that month though, I had a grow tent. I had LEDs. I had seeds. I was like, I'm growing my own CBD plants. Right. And so I got super heavy into growing, which I'm awful at. But I got into it super hard because, my yields were not great. And, sometimes I would lose a couple plants to mold and stuff like that. But since cannabis since Massachusetts just legalized, and remember, this is 2019, and 2018 was the first store that opened. So I was just like, it's legal here. I can do this. This is amazing, because New York wasn't legalized. They only recently did that, right? So I was like, I can have up to 6 plants. I was like, I'm in. And so I started growing. And eventually, after processing and just learning everything I could about it, the CBD that I was consuming was helpful. But when I added THC, it kind of unlocked something extra.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't the inflammation. The inflammation was the symptom.
Yep.
The true cause, we already talked about it, was stress. Right? So if I could remove the stress by just relaxing with a little bit of THC and CBD at the end of the day, slowly everything got better and all my symptoms went away. Right.
Yeah.
So that was the unlock. I was like, oh, it's not the inflammation. It's because I'm stressed. Duh. So I removed the stress by consuming THC and CBD together. And then eventually, and that's where I unlocked that formulation of 3-2, which is why our products, when they originally came out, have 3-2 ratios, 3 milligrams of THC to 2 milligrams of CBD, was because that was what helped me so much to reduce my stress.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, and then the company had been sold at this point, I literally had rosin presses. I had a washing machine. I had a whole lab.
You were like all in.
I had a short path, right? I literally had a short path, and Delta 8 was starting to come out. I was like, what's this all about? I refluxed with citric acid, some CBD, and created Delta 8. I'm like, this is super cool. Like, this is super interesting stuff. And so I just got deeper and deeper and deeper into it, to the point where I was just like, wait a second, if this helped me so much and like things aren't going so great at work, maybe I should think about this as my next thing.
Well, that was going to be my next question, is like, at what point did you think that this was a viable business problem to solve? Like, was it because you were obsessed, or did you actually, was there any part of you that like turned away from the rosin press and the plants growing and like all the fun weed stuff and was like, okay, what's the landscape of cannabis in Massachusetts? Like, what's going on around me? Like, how did you know? Well, yeah. What was the business problem? Like, how did you?
Yeah. So the business problem was secondary. The number one problem was this significantly helps people. Like, this is like, whether as an adult use operator, I can't say the word medicine, but that's what people use it for.
Yeah.
Including myself. And what triggered me to go into this was that my mother, who suffers from rheumatoid arthritis, suffers from all types of pain. She was taking pain medication, stuff like that. Her sleep was awful, like all these things. And I'm like, I'll just send you stuff. So I started making stuff for my mom. Right. So I was just out in my garage making all types of different products to see what helped my mom better. And eventually I stumbled upon these different formulations with like high CBD loads that were really helpful for her. And she still takes them to this day. I still provide my mom a ton of medicine, and none of it really even has THC. Maybe there's some trace amounts and stuff like that in some things, but like virtually none of it's THC, just CBD. Sometimes I'll throw CBG or some CBN in there, some like other minor cannabinoids as well, just to like see how it works and how it responds to her. So the business case didn't come up. It was literally like, this is very useful for people and more people should do it. But I also don't necessarily want, like, in my philosophy behind it, is it like, I'm not all of a sudden going to turn a bunch of people into smokers overnight. Mm-hmm. So like, from my perspective, I was like, I have to create something that's as effective as smoking, but something you can just ingest instead. And so I thought back to Ojai Energetics, and I said, that company, which is based out of Ojai, California, which is a beautiful, beautiful town, that company kind of set me on the path, because I went through all the ingredients and I was like, all these, and I found one that I'd never heard before. And I was like, what the heck is that? So I started searching that up. I'm like, oh, an emulsifier? I get that. And so I was like, that's how you make salad dressing. I get it. So now I can put oil into water and consuming it that way with some other technology behind it, which we will, it's kind of a deeper subject there. But once you kind of get to that level, you're like, oh, you can actually get this very similar effect as a smoking high with this type of water-based tincture. And so that set me on the path of like the beverage enhancer, which, later became beverage enhancer, and, good feel seltzers and stuff like that.
So this is actually incredible to me, because like, it doesn't sound like you gauged too much of the professional cannabis landscape. You were trying to help your mom feel better. You were trying to help yourself feel better. You got to, as people do when they're going down paths like this, they become obsessed, and in figuring these things out. So you're helping mom out. Maybe you're making some products for friends or whatever. Like, is there someone who's like, hey, Jason, like, you should do this? Or was that something you figured out?
I went above that, because I didn't survey the landscape, to be honest, but I did start searching for like ways that I could find other versions of this online, because I just wanted more for myself, right? Even though I was making it myself, I was just like, there's got to be other people out there doing it. And I looked across a bunch of dispensaries and there was nothing like it on the menu. And I was just like, oh, like, I wish I could just go down the street and buy it. You know what I mean? Like it'd be so much easier for my life. And so, because the THC side was the hard side, it was like the THC component, which helped me tremendously, was the component that was missing because I was buying all this hemp product, CBD and stuff like that. So I was making primarily CBD products for my mom.
Yeah.
And so the THC side is problematic because how do I get do I just have to go to the store and buy like, distillate darts and all this other stuff? And I don't even that stuff that exists back then. So I eventually decided, let me research a little bit. So I did research a bit and just to figure out what was out there, what wasn't. And there was nothing out there, right? There was one drink, right? Which I'm not going to name names because I'm not going to throw, shade on anybody, but because it was early, we're talking 2019, and it was made using inferior technology. I like knew the technology by that well enough that I was like, it's not made with good technology, meaning that it's more like a traditional edible, which will take like an hour to onset. Whereas the technology that I had already created at that point had a 5-minute onset. So it's just like, what does 5 minutes get you though? Like, what does it matter? Right. And eventually through the science, I realized that like an ingestible, like an edible, like that original beverage that was in Massachusetts, goes through the whole first path metabolism. It takes a long time and it converts it into 11-hydroxy-THC. So something different. That's not Delta 9 anymore. It's different. But my system, theoretically at the time, but proven now, is straight Delta 9. You're actually getting Delta 9, the proper Delta 9 chemical in your bloodstream. So there's no conversion process, which means it also works a lot faster. But I was like, what does it actually get you? Get you control, right? Because if you take an edible, I have this conversation with so many people because a lot people don't understand what's about to happen, right?
No.
The future is here. It's just not widely distributed, right? That's why I always say, right, which is I can't remember the person who said that, but the future is here, but it's not widely distributed. We have the future of what cannabis is going to be because now we can control your high. We can control it to the point where we have a 5-minute onset and you can dose very specifically what you actually need. Whereas a traditional edible, when you consume it, an hour later, you're like, I got tons of cannabis and I'm going to go have a panic attack. Great.
Yeah.
Or
who knows what's going to happen?
Or I don't know. Exactly. Or I don't have any I don't feel anything yet. Let me take another one. Right. And then all of a sudden now you're off to the moon again. Right. And then you're on that journey for like 6 to 8 hours. Right. 6 to 8 hours goes by and finally you're like, okay, I feel sober enough that I can actually function again. Whereas products like ours, you have a 5-minute onset and the offset is very similar too. It's like an hour to 2 hours later, you feel basically sober again. So it's like a beer at that point. It's just casual, which I was like, duh, if it's like a beer, I'm going to make a drink.
Yep.
And so that's kind of how I went into that path. And then as I'm in the process of building out the facility, Levia launches. And I was like, oh, like there's another company that was doing this. I had no clue. I literally had no clue. I thought I was going to be the first one out.
Well, here's the other thing I thought you said was interesting, which is like you weren't interested in getting people to smoke. Like you really, and again, I understand like the words you're supposed to use and not use. So allow me to use them,
Sure.
which is like, these are wellness products, whether you want to call them that or not. So my hunch always, like just sitting back, observing as many cannabis companies as I do, is that the future of, big cannabis, and I don't mean that in the sense of like big tobacco, but I mean like the future of this thing that we're all doing, I kind of think is in beverage. Like I've always thought that. I've thought it for a very long time, that when it comes time for that person to have that conversation with you again, that if it's between you and a smokable brand, and again, I'm projecting, speculating, that a beverage brand specifically is going to be far more attractive than a flower company or just a cultivator or something, like just a flower brand or something like that.
And then let me also step in.
But did you think that too? Like, here's what I'm asking is like, when you're like, okay, I'm going to file for this LLC. Okay. Are you thinking about exit strategy when you're filing for that LLC? And did beverage play into that?
That's why it's a C corp. So really, I just want to clarify.
That's why my LLC is a C corp.
That's why it's a C corp, because it has always been an acquisition target from day one. As much as, and my face happens to be super attached to it right now, which I'm not in love with. I actually would prefer other people from my company were like the highlights of the story, or the brand itself was the big highlight. But that's another story. I don't necessarily want my face attached to the company in reality, because I think the products are good enough to stand on their own where I don't have to sell it myself. I literally think people should be coming to us and buying it from us, right, directly. But let me just clarify one thing. I have no problem with people smoking cannabis. I encourage it. Like, go for it. If that's the way you get what you need to get out of it, whether it's for recreational purposes or medicinal purposes, I don't care. I'm not that type of person who's going to be like, I don't think anybody should smoke it. I'm not that person.
Right.
Do it however you want to. For me and my products, I don't want to encourage any inhalation. We've looked at the numbers. We've even considered like, oh, should we bring out a flower? Because, you know, my marketing person was just like, there's arbitrage right now. Cultivation price, everything's going down. Our brand is so strong, we could put out flower. And at one point I was considering it. Then I was like, wait a second. Like, I'm not just chasing money here, right? This is about a long-term vision and enabling these products to go as far as you can. So yes, from the very beginning, once I realized that I could put it in a drink and it would have the very similar effects to beer, I was like, of course that's how they're going to consume it in the future. Not everybody, but immediately I made the connection, and I was just like, wait a second, like, this is 3 years ago. Like,
who the hell wants to eat 20 gummies full of sugar? Like, who wants to smoke?
But it's not even, it's that, but it's also like, if you're going, and this is the one thing, what's this? I can't remember his name right now. He said it to me a few years ago. I can't remember his name right now. But he's in our group of like beverage people. He said to me, he goes, when somebody walks through the door of your home, the first thing you do is say, what do you want to drink? Sure. They don't say, hey, split this gummy with me. Or like, you know, it's like, it's like just different, right? And so beverages for me are the ultimate unlock for getting cannabis into as many consumers' hands as possible. Because if you just say, hey, you want a beer or do you want Good Feels? Then if they choose Good Feels, great. If they choose the beer, that's also fine. I'm not judging against alcohol either. It's just not what I do. But I will say that like more people will get better benefits out of a Good Feels product than a beer.
How do you, and I usually close the podcast. We're not done yet, Jason, but I usually close the podcast with asking like, what are your plans? You know, what do you want to do next year, but whatever. But like, if you already know you're not going to expand your verticals to include vapes, smokes, gummies, even, what is your kind of roadmap for, are you going to release any new verticals? Is this a sort of thing where you're going to put out new flavors, you know, like?
Yeah. So we have a pretty storied roadmap ahead of us. We have a bunch of announcements we'll probably be making over the next few months, but yeah. So as far as, you know, product, you know, adding more SKUs, I'm always reminded by Athletic Greens. Athletic Greens makes one product and they're worth many billions of dollars right now. They make one thing. That's why a lot of cannabis companies get it mistaken by, oh, let's just release all these products and we'll be the Walmart of weed, because we'll just have every little detail and everything tuned up. And, you know, if you're vertically integrated, actually, it is not a bad strategy. Or if you're MSO, it's not a bad, obviously you need that strategy because you want to be able to offer all these products. In MSO in the traditional sense of like, you know, not the new up and coming craft MSOs, which, you know, some of my friends are really great at that stuff where they're in a couple of states and they're just trying to grow. But like more like the Canopies and the Tilrays and all those companies that are just like, you know, want to be the Walmarts of weed.
I think that's market share.
It's all market share, right? Like you do you, that's your thing. For me as a brand, we have to have a strong identity in the market. That's what brand is. Right. And somebody posted that quote from Seth Godin the other day, which was fantastic, which is what he said, that if Nike was to open a hotel, you would know, you'd be like, yeah, that'd be super cool. Like I could visualize what that would be. But he used Hyatt, I think. If Hyatt was to create a sneaker, you'd be like,
what the hell?
Like, I have no idea what that would look like. I don't get it. Because Nike has a brand and Hyatt has real estate,
Yeah.
right? So we're going after the Nike model, right? And I've been studying Nike for the last few months and just being like going over that. I love that the Air movie came out and all. It's just like, I love that stuff because it's just like, it reminds me, and one of my advisors actually pointed this out. He goes, it reminds me of the Nike story because you've got things lined up the way they should be. It's just that nobody's heard of you yet. And you just have to get out there. And of course, with advertising rules and cannabis and stuff like that, it's very, very limited. But he's like, you have got the formations of something that could be giant, right? And so if we focus on our core product offerings, which is just straight up ready to drink versions and also mix-in versions, we can go really, really far to the point where it'd be a national brand with those two product type SKUs. Now, it doesn't mean, of course, we're going to release new flavors and seasonals, and we'll have different variations on our enhancers that are like, we have our sleep version now. And we also have, a couple others in the works that are just purpose specific, or they're just for fun, or they're for sleep, like I said. So like, there's going to be variations on those things, but unless some other innovation comes through, that's a non-combustible, like that's an ingestible product.
Yeah.
Like I can't, we're just going to stick to our lane because we have to focus. We've got to put our head down and focus. That's what's going to make this company right now. And one of the things that people always try to do is when they go too wide, they get I used to be a squirrel in my past life. I used to be like, what's that thing over there? What's that thing over there? Let's go chase that. Let's go chase that. Right. And AI is teasing me away right now because AI is just like, hey, there's so many cool things happening over here. You should just go. And I'm like, no. I've got a crazy successful company today that is going to be even more successful in the future. So why would I go chase that shiny, acorn over there? You got to focus, AI corn, right? The AI corn. Perfect. Nice job, Phil. So it's all about focus for us right now, putting our heads down and executing because we have a roadmap. We have a plan. And it wasn't always that way. When I first started, I just admitted to you, I was like, I knew beverages were going to be a thing. I just didn't know how we were going to get there. Now we know how we're going to get there, which is the most exciting thing that I could ever dream possible for this company right now.
That's awesome. It's good to feel that way. What about licensing in other states? Like, I'm sure you're thinking about it. Like, it's costly to, some of our mutual friends in Massachusetts are doing these things in new states right now. And have you thought about that?
Oh yeah. We get approached all the time. Like we get approached for two main things. Hey, when are you going to come to New York? We have, room for you, or Michigan, or whatever the state is. And we get the other side being people trying to get to Massachusetts, be like, hey, where are you going to go? Are you co-packing? Because we would love to work with you, right? Mm-hmm. So we get offers on both sides of being in Massachusetts deeper with the co-packing opportunities, but also being pulled outside of Massachusetts. So you're right. It's capital. It's strictly capital. So obtaining a new license in another state isn't as attractive. Licensing our brand to another state is more attractive, but you still need capital because you need boots on the ground. You need people there in stores, shaking hands, kissing babies, whatever you're going to do, to be able to be in front of all these different dispensary owners and to be able to be boots on the ground on the marketing side as well, doing pop-ups and events. And like, there have been so many brands that have come to Massachusetts, we're in the market for like a month and you've never heard of them again because they didn't put boots on the ground. They just didn't put any effort into this. They said, oh, it'll just sell itself. It does not sell itself. You have to work really, really hard.
I can't wait to clip this. It doesn't sell itself, does it?
It doesn't sell it. No, it does not.
No, it does not.
You have to work really hard and you have to have boots on the ground.
Yeah, you have to have boots on the ground. Brand building is not, I'm getting a particular jolly out of hearing you say this right now because this has been like an almost like, it's been a huge argument in certain circles, specifically in Vermont right now with whatever, the cannabis political landscape in Vermont. Who gives a shit? But anyway, I'm like trying to educate some people I'm speaking with being like, dude, I got the best, sour diesel that was ever existed. I'm like, no one fucking cares. Like, that doesn't matter. It's not an iPhone. You think it's an iPhone and you think your it's going to sell itself, but it's not. It's definitely not. Like you need the boots on the ground. It's got to look good,
On the other side of it, though, keep in mind that your logo isn't a brand either.
Sure.
You could spend 100 hours designing the most perfect, beautiful logo, all these other things. And you say, oh, that I've got this beautiful brand. But until you actually make your first sale, until you make that first transaction and actually see how people are receiving it, or if you've done any of the casework up front to make sure that you've made a strong argument for product market fit before you launch, like you don't have anything.
Exactly.
You just have an idea.
Right.
Or a really fancy, shiny logo.
Yeah, you have a shiny logo, maybe you have a good product, but you have no ethos. There's no soul behind it, and there can't be a soul until this thing is born, right? So we have to birth this thing and maybe learn some lessons and maybe have some shitty looking packaging, and maybe figure out what our language around talking about this thing is. But it is like a constant evolution. Like right now, CannaPlanners is going through, I mean, we're using the word rebrand, but that's a way bigger thing than what we're actually doing. But, you know, you have to critically think about who is this, I want to give human qualities to this jar of beverage enhancer, right? And I have to figure out how to dress this kid and
Yep.
you know, what music he's going to like or whatever. Yeah, it's for sure a constant struggle. And if you're not putting your any thought into that, which, bro, I mean, I'm sure you're not surprised at this point, but I still am about how many companies enter into this thing being like weed sells itself.
Yeah. And it maybe was true the first like year or two. But that's just the short term thinking. Yeah. But I mean, I'm more mentioned that. Yeah, but you know, you gotta have that long-term vision with a lot of the stuff regardless though. You just can't be like, I'm in and out. I mean, some companies were able to do that, but as we're kind of in that kind of like downswing, slowly crawling out of it,
right?
Like you have to have
post lots
plans.
Of consolidation, post like a little bit of flatlining on, you know, price per pounds and things like that. Yeah, absolutely.
And when we're doing our funding round, which we have a little bridge round open right now, actually for existing investors. When we talk to them, it's funny because sometimes even our existing investors are just like, well, Canopy's down. And I'm like, yeah, but like, we're not a publicly traded, we're totally different. Like people, especially I talk to new investors, that comes up a lot. They're like, yeah, but cannabis stocks have just been down. And we're just like, yeah, but
shit.
We're a private company in a lucrative market and we're doing okay. Yeah. We're not thriving, as Angela would say sometimes, but we're surviving and we're doing okay to the point where when all this washes out, we're going to be coming up right with everybody else. It's long term. It's always been long term for me. And so I try to plan these things out in 10 years at a time. I don't necessarily think of like a 2-year or 3-year plan, although some people ask me questions about 2 or 3 years from now. I think of 10 years, right? And I've already been in it for 3. So I got another 7 years in my 10-year plan right now.
Interesting. I have kind of something I've been thinking about with you, which is like, so here's what you and I share, which is we started a internet marketing company and we've started something completely different in basically food science, right? We've started a food product. I didn't know shit about starting literally, except for making it look good, because that was my skill set. And I'd gone into this new, I started a soda company. This is years ago. I'd started the soda company and my co-founder was a co-packer. He was a mixologist, a chef, like all these things. Like he could make the best soda ever. He knew how to get it around a co-pack. He knew how to install a bottling line. He knew what a fucking glycol chiller is. Like I still don't know what that is. Like, you know what I mean? All these things that come with food grade product manufacturing. It's a lot of work. So when you started your first companies, you had your core group of founders. You were able to be like, yo, dude, like, tell me what a glycol chiller is, or don't, like, go buy one. I know we need one. You know what I mean? How did you know to do any of this shit?
Just because I just sat down and banged my head against the wall until it finally worked. So in the earliest of early days, I actually built my own bottling machine just because I had to figure out how it all worked. Like, cause I was looking at videos online. I was like,
you built your own bottling machine.
Yeah, it might still in my
Okay, so
basement right now. collecting
hold
dust.
on. Let me just add context to the listener, because that sounds like a simple thing you just said. I just built something that fills a bottle. So a bottling machine at its lowest end costs $125,000, right? At its highest end, when it produces whatever 1,000 bottles a minute, like at a Coca-Cola factory, those things are like $10 million a pop, maybe. You know, you have to build a building around them. What the hell are you talking about? You built one.
I just reverse engineered using videos and some diagrams, like what it would actually, what's it's supposed to do. It does not have all the bells and whistles. Like my second version, which I never finished because we ended up buying a $120,000 bottling machine. If you spot on with that number, spot on. That machine that I built, it didn't have counter pressure, right? And so and counter pressure is one of those things where you have to make sure that the CO2 levels are super. In a lot of cannabis drinks that first came out in Massachusetts even didn't have counter pressure, so they would say lightly sparkling, because they couldn't hold the CO2 in. Yeah, they couldn't hold the CO2 in because they didn't have counter pressure, and so my machine didn't have counter pressure either, but it was good enough for samples, right? So we could just bust out a bunch, and we could, run 200, 300 an hour or something like that. Nothing crazy, no crazy throughput, but you just, this is such a trite thing that I always say, but I think it's super applicable, which is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. I literally just looked at diagrams. I figured it out. I reverse engineered a few things, and I said, all right, if I can just, is that who said it?
I think so.
Probably. Sounds right, actually, for him. So, but I said, if I can figure out, maybe I can figure out how to cap things. Because they had wand fillers and stuff like that. You could wand fill from a keg. And I was like, well, if I can figure out capping, that'll be one thing I can figure out. So I figured out capping. Right. I put a, I don't even know what these things are called anymore. That's how in and out of my brain it goes sometimes. But I did actually physically build it all. I just don't. But no, it has a rod and a piston. It's oh my God. It's like the things that hold your trunk open.
A hydraulic thing.
Like a hydraulic thing, right? Exactly. So I was just like, all right, so I can do that. And I built a 4-head version. So I could put 4 bottles up there. And it would go conk, and it would cap 4 bottles at a time. Okay. Yeah. And I was like, well, if I figured that part out, I could probably figure out, filling, right?
Yep.
And so I built the filling component next, right? And just one step at a time. And eventually I made it into a track. And so I could just slide a tray. I built custom trays to slide 4 bottles down at a time to fill and then to cap,
Here's the nightmare I have when I see your bottle. Show it to me again.
This one?
Yeah. So that's the Boston Round, if I'm not mistaken. Okay.
Well, yeah, it's called the stubby, but yeah. When they're this big, they're like beer bottles, basically,
Right, like a Red Stripe bottle, basically. But those but if you go into a catalog, those are called Boston Rounds. And then they have a crown cap on it. So the nightmare I have is pasteurizing an entire. Oh my God. Pasteurize. Yeah. Okay. So you pasteurize your drink when you're done making it. I don't know if you have to do that, but you put it through a pasteurization process, which means you just blast these glass bottles with steam. Like picture those industrial dishwashers from a cafeteria or something like that. It's exactly like that. You put the thing in, you close it, it steams it. It's safe.
And you're done.
But then you pull those things out and you then have to put them into cases, and they're, 200 degrees each. And those crown caps are each small knives that go, there's 16 tiny little knives around each one of those caps.
These could be,
and you pick them up 3 at a time and you're like, my hands are on fire and bleeding.
Yeah. Yep. No, we don't have that particular issue, but once we bought them, they're cold, and we just pop them in the vault at that point. But yeah, Perfect. We do a little bit of cleanup afterwards, just of moisture levels. But yeah. But what was the original question, even? It was because
I don't even remember.
Who
cares? Oh, I was just asking you how you knew how to do all these things. It's obviously an entire skill set. I'll use me, for example, building a website or selling the build of a website versus figuring out a recipe, understanding how to then scale that recipe into a bright tank, right? You start making these recipes on a soda stream, right? I'm sure that's what you did, right? You just made them on a soda stream
I built my own seltzering machine actually instead. But yeah.
Of course, yeah. You would never go buy a soda stream.
I do have a soda stream. I started with it and I was like, I could just do better than this. And so I built something that was better.
That's why you're an entrepreneur. This is, and we haven't talked about it yet, but the entrepreneurial arrogance, which is exactly that, which is fuck SodaStream, even though they're $1 billion company, I can do better.
I could do it better. Yeah. And I did. I actually did it. I have
I'm sure you did. Of course you did.
I have on-demand seltzer, whatever I want. I make kegs for my kids. My son, who has a gaming PC in the basement, he asks me all the time, hey, can you refill the keg? I'm like, all right. I bring it upstairs, sanitize real quick, pop the system back onto this keg. I'll 5 gallons of seltzer in about 5 minutes, and I'll just put it back down there, put it back into the kegerator so you can have fresh seltzer wherever you want it.
That's awesome. I want to, so unlike most people I talk to on these podcasts, because you just told me, I don't ask people where they see themselves in a year or 2 years, because cannabis years are like dog years. So asking someone where they see themselves in 2 years is like asking where they see themselves in 14 years. So you just told me that you've got a 10-year plan kind of rolled out. Without, spilling too much of the beans, or spill as many beans as you'd like, can you talk to us about the next year or 6 months?
Sure. As I mentioned, we obviously have some product launches coming out and stuff like that. And the 10-year plan may come to fruition sooner. It's like the way things are moving right now with the regulatory side, like we actually could get there faster. Ultimately, our main goal, and the goal that I've always had since literally day one, is I always think back to my old haunts, my old bars in Brooklyn that I used to always go to, right?
Yeah.
And my ultimate dream is to find Good Feels products in those bars.
Oh, yeah.
That's it. It's going to happen. And that's why it's like, I don't know if it's 10 years or 1 year from now, but it'll happen. And at that moment, I'll be like, I did it. I actually have a cannabis beverage in a bar. And it's now that means nationwide, this can be accepted, right? So it's like, that's the ultimate dream. And that is something that may happen sooner rather than later.
I love it. I love watching your ambition play out as an observer. You are highly respected in the halls of CannaPlanners. Even though you're not yet a client, you will be, you son of a gun, someday. But we love your products. I still have some in the fridge from I got so many from you, and I don't know where that was.
You can probably.
Yeah. So we've still got a bunch in the fridge. Jason Reposa, you've gone from stressed to blessed, baby. You've done it. We love watching the Good Feel story play out in real time, and it makes us feel good. Let's go with it. Tell the people where they can learn more about Good Feels and maybe even more about you.
Sure. We're on all the socials at Get Good Feels, as well as getgoodfeels.com. Me, I mostly play on LinkedIn. Maybe I'll go into Twitter eventually someday, but LinkedIn is kind of like my home right now. But I'm always available. Anybody who's an entrepreneur, you're my favorite people. Like I said that to an entrepreneur literally yesterday on LinkedIn who was DMing me about a question. I was like, you are my favorite person, because anybody who's willing to say, I don't care what other people think of me, and I'm going to go do my own thing, they're heroes in my book. That takes guts, right? I don't think it's that hard because I've done it so many times, but I think it takes guts for the first time. And anybody who does that is my favorite person. So anybody who is an entrepreneur, who's up and coming, who's trying to figure out what the next thing they need to do, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll answer your questions.
That's awesome. I love that. And right now, you're my favorite person. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to chat with me. I have been your host, Will Reed. This has been SENSimilla. We will see you next time. Thank you, everybody. Peace.